73 cents and a shattered promise. The wind came down off the red cliffs like it meant to peel the skin from her bones. Anya Sloane hunched her shoulders and pressed her back against the warped wooden wall of the trading post. Clutching her coat closed with one numb hand, while the other curled around the coins in her pocket. The sound of the wind filled her ears, a low, hollow roar that swallowed the creak of signs and the distant bark of a dog. Christmas morning, Ibad Zoe. Bitter Wind Crossing lived up to its name. She tried not to shiver. Shivering drew attention. Attention brought looks. Looks turned into questions she couldn't answer without unraveling. Her breath fogged in front of her face. She counted the coins again, because counting was something to do, something that made the moment feel less like a cliff edge. 73 cents? She lined them up on the narrow ledge beside her knee. 2 nickels, a dime. The rest pennies, dull and scratched, their copper faces worn smooth by other desperate hands. She had counted them so many times, the numbers no longer surprised her, yet some foolish part of her still hoped the total might change if she looked long enough. It didn't. Inside the trading post, laughter spilled out when the door opened. Warmth followed, along with the smell of coffee and salt pork. Someone called out a holiday greeting. Anya turned her face away before the door could swing shut again. She didn't want to be seen like this, thin, hollow-eyed, sitting alone on Christmas with her whole life reduced to a small, humiliating pile of metal. 6 weeks ago, she had stepped off the stagecoach with her head high and her heart full. 6 weeks was all it had taken to hollow her out. She hadn't come to Arizona chasing adventure. She'd come chasing certainty. Silas Hardin's letters had promised it in careful, confident lines. Land a future. Marriage before spring. He wrote about the sky as if he owned it, about the town as if it welcomed him, about her as if she already belonged there. She had believed him because believing was easier than staying where she was. Watching her chances narrow with each passing year. Kansas had been gray and small. This place was vast, beautiful, unforgiving. Silas had met her at the edge of town the day she arrived, not alone. The woman beside him wore a wedding ring that caught the sun. She held a baby on her hip. Silas's smile had faltered for just a moment, long enough for Anya to know, with a cold certainty, that nothing he said next would matter. "I meant to write," he'd said, eyes sliding away. But things changed. They had Auntie. Not for him. Everything had for her. Now the town treated her like a cautionary tale. The men watched too closely. The women watched not at all. The boarding house owner had given her 1 week's grace before reminding her that rooms weren't held on sympathy. Respectability was currency here, and Anya had none left to spend. A gust of wind snatched at her skirt. One of the pennies skittered off the ledge and dropped into the dirt at her feet. She stared at it. The penny lay half buried in the dust, dull against the pale ground. She knew she should bend down and pick it up. Every cent mattered now, but the thought of reaching for it felt heavier than lifting her own weight. A strange stillness settled over her, deeper than cold, deeper than hunger. For the first time since she'd arrived, she wondered, not dramatically, not with tears whether hope could simply run out. "You dropped something." The voice came from her left, calm and low, as steady as the ground beneath her feet. Anya startled and looked up. The man stood a few paces away, holding the penny between his fingers. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a heavy wool coat worn smooth at the elbows. His hair was dark, pulled back at the nape of his neck, and his face bore the quiet lines of someone used to wind and sun. His eyes, dark assessing, met hers without curiosity or judgment. He hadn't rushed to help. He hadn't hovered. He simply noticed. She hesitated before taking the coin. Something about the way he held it made her feel seen in a way that unsettled her, as if he understood exactly what that single penny represented. "Thank you," she said, her voice thinner than she intended. He nodded once and slipped his hands back into his pockets. For a moment, he didn't move. Neither did she. "You're cold," he said finally. Not a question. "So is everyone," Anya replied, lifting her chin. Pride flared, brittle but stubborn. "I am not begging." "I didn't say you were." There was no accusation in his tone, no pity either, just fact. She looked away, embarrassed by the sudden heat behind her eyes. The wind howled between the buildings, carrying the sound of church bells from somewhere beyond the ridge. "I know that look," he said after a pause. She turned back, defensive. "What look? The one where you're doing math that doesn't work?" His gaze flicked briefly to the coins, then back to her face. "Trying to decide what you can afford to lose." Her throat tightened. He had no right to be that accurate. "You don't know anything about me," she said. "No," he agreed, "but I know what 73 cents feels like." 74, she corrected automatically, closing her fist around the penny. That earned the smallest change in his expression, not quite a smile, but something close. "My name's Kai Yazzie," he said. "I live north of here." "A ways." She waited, arms wrapped around herself, unsure why she hadn't walked away yet. "I need help," he continued. "Cooking. Keeping house. Honest work. Hard work. I don't pay much, but there's food, a warm place to sleep, and wages enough to save, if you're careful." Her heart kicked hard against her ribs. She had heard offers before. Men who smiled too much, leaned too close, spoke in half-promises. This was different. Too plain to be practiced. "And why," she asked carefully, "would you offer that to a stranger?" Kai studied her for a long moment, as if choosing his words mattered. "Because you're at the edge of something," he said at last. "And because no one should be alone there." The wind surged between them, sharp and biting. Anya looked down at the coins in her hand, then at the empty road stretching north beyond the town. She thought of the boarding house door closing behind her, of another night wrapped in all her clothes, pretending not to be hungry, of the penny she'd almost let go. "What's north of here?" she asked. "Quiet," Kai said, "and work that makes sense at the end of the day." She swallowed. Fear and relief tangled together in her chest, impossible to separate. "I'll need to think," she said. He inclined his head. "I'll be back at dawn. If you're here, we'll go. If not," he shrugged lightly. "I wish you well." Kai turned and walked away, boots crunching against the frozen dirt. Anya watched him until he disappeared between the buildings, the wind erasing his tracks almost as soon as he made them. She closed her hand around the coins and pressed them to her chest. For the first time in weeks, the road ahead did not feel entirely empty, and that frightened her more than the cold ever had. The sun had not yet risen when Anya Sloane stood at the edge of Bitter Wind Crossing, her trunk lashed shut and her gloves thin with wear. The wind had stilled overnight, as if the land itself was holding its breath. The snow crunching beneath her boots was the only sound until hooves broke the silence. Kai Yazzie came riding out of the shadows, the same wool coat wrapped tight, reins loose in his hands. He nodded once when he saw her. No questions. No greetings. Just a quiet expectation. He helped her lift the trunk into the wagon bed. It wasn't heavy not anymore. Most of her life had been sold, traded, or left behind. What remained fit easily in the back of a wagon drawn by two shaggy, patient-looking horses. They rode in silence at first. The town shrank behind them until it vanished into the horizon haze. Ahead lay only open land, dry riverbeds, sandstone ridges, and stretches of snow-dusted brush that looked brittle enough to snap beneath the weight of a bird. Anya tucked her hands beneath her coat and stared at the white breath of the horses curling into the cold air. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, just big, like the land around them. It made her feel small in a way that wasn't entirely unpleasant. Kai finally spoke once the sun cracked over the eastern rim. "We'll be riding for about 4 hours. My place is up against the red ridge near Tiesnagican." She glanced at him. "That Navajo?" He nodded. "Means cliff that watches. A lot of stories tied to it. Is that where you're from?" "I was born closer to Shiprock, but this land's been good to me." That was all he offered. She leaned back against the wagon's edge, letting the rhythm of the wheels lull her thoughts. At first, she tried to imagine what the house might look like, stone or wood, smaller, but then stopped. Expectations had cost her enough. They passed a low rise, and below it lay a flat of land bordered by thin cottonwoods. A small structure stood in its center, wooden, weathered, with smoke rising thin from a crooked chimney. A corral stood nearby, and in the distance, a larger building loomed, built from logs and red earth. It looked older, rounder. Kai pointed toward it. "That's the Hogan. My grandmother built it when I was a boy." "You live with your grandmother?" He shook his head. "Not anymore. She comes and goes. Stays when she feels like it." As if summoned, a figure stepped from the Hogan's doorway, just as the wagon rolled past. An old woman, wrapped in layers of patterned shawls, her silver hair braided thick and long. Her face was lined, but her back straight. Her eyes followed Anya with unnerving steadiness. "She doesn't speak much English," Kai said, "but she understands more than she lets on." "Who said I was good at talking?" Anya muttered. Kai cracked a faint smile. "Good. She likes quiet." The wagon came to a stop beside the wooden house. It was plain, but not broken down. 2 steps led up to a porch that creaked when they walked on it. The door opened easily. Inside was cold. No fire. No warmth. Just the smell of dry wood and stone and something faintly herbal. Kai set her trunk down in the front room. "Kitchenette through there. Upstairs has 2 rooms. Take whichever." She nodded. "You live here alone?" 3 years now." She stepped across the wood plank floor, the boards creaking beneath her boots. Everything was simple, practical. A table, 2 chairs, a stove, no curtains, no wasted space. Kai watched her take it in. "I'm out with the horses most days. Supplies once a month. There's meat in the smokehouse. Dry goods in the cellar. Firewood stacked out back. And me?" she asked. "What do you expect?" "Hot meals. Clean house. Honest work. $10 a month. I don't expect more." It was strange the way that steadiness calmed her. Like the ground beneath her feet had finally stopped shifting. He paused at the door. "I'll show you the barn. And the pump. You'll need water." They stepped back into the cold. The barn was well built, the pump stiff with frost. She worked the handle while he watched, then showed her the line of troughs, the woodpile, the smokehouse. It wasn't too much, but it was more than she'd had yesterday. By midday, she had chosen the upstairs room that faced west. It held a narrow bed, a small dresser, and a window with a view of the red cliffs. The walls were bare. She placed her gloves on the sill and opened the trunk. Her belongings barely filled the dresser. She folded the empty trunk closed. Downstairs, she lit the stove with shaking hands. It smoked at first, then caught. The warmth was slow to build, but she kept feeding it, careful, steady. Kai came in near sundown, smelling of horses and dust and snow. He didn't say much, just nodded once when he saw the fire was going and the kettle steaming. She placed a bowl of beans and flatbread on the table. He took it without ceremony, ate quickly, and rinsed the bowl himself before vanishing back outside to finish his chores. That night, she lay in the narrow bed listening to the sounds of the house, the pop of the stove, the creak of wood settling, the low whistle of wind around the eaves. It was not comfort, not yet, but it was stillness. The next morning, she woke before light, lit the stove again, made weak coffee and cornmeal mush. Kai ate it without complaint. They did not talk. Each day followed the same rhythm. Small chores, cold air, silence. Slowly, the house began to feel lived in. Less like a borrowed space, more like something she might, in time, belong to. On the 4th day, a knock came at the door. Kai opened it without surprise. Tomas Blackbird stood there, cheeks ruddy, scarf knotted haphazardly around his neck, a burlap sack slung over his shoulder. He looked at Anya with a smirk that could only come from someone used to knowing everyone else's business. "Well now," he said the rumors were true. Anya straightened. Tomas grinned wider. "Don't worry, I'm not here to chase you off. Just brought salt and flour." He stepped in, glancing around the house. Cozy. Smells like someone knows what to do with a stove. Kai took the sack without comment. Anya tried not to react. "I'm Tomas," he said, tipping an imaginary hat. "Part Navajo, part trouble. You, Anya Sloan. That name's got a Kansas ring to it." She said nothing. Tomas didn't push. "Well, welcome to the ridge. It's quiet. No one's screaming, unless it's the wind or the horses." He leaned closer, eyes mischievous. "But be careful. That quiet'll sneak up on you. Make you think you're alone when maybe you're not." She didn't know what to say to that. Tomas left soon after, whistling. That night, Anya found a sprig of dried sage tucked beside the window. She hadn't put it there. She went to bed later than usual, the fire warm behind her, and thought about what Tomas had said. About quiet. About not being alone. She didn't believe in signs, but she believed in patterns. And something about the past few days felt different. She wasn't safe yet. Not really. But maybe she wasn't on the edge anymore. This time, she hadn't been abandoned. She had walked into the unknown with her eyes wide open. The morning light came late in January, slow to stretch over the mesa and spill down the red cliffs that ringed the ranch. Anya had already been up for hours, kneeling in front of the stove, coaxing fire from stubborn embers. Her fingers were stiff from the cold, but she was learning its rhythm now and to feed it. When to wait, when to stop forcing, and let the heat come. The house was quiet. Kai had gone out before sunrise, leaving a trail of boot prints across the snow-packed yard. He moved through the days like someone who had spent too long doing things alone efficient. Silent, never asking for more than what was needed. She found herself doing the same, falling into step with a life that made sense, even if it wasn't easy. She had started with the kitchen first. It was the one space she could control, scrub into order. The counters had been clean but lifeless, mismatched jars. No system, dust in corners. Now, spices were grouped. The knives hung where she could reach them. Dried corn was sorted into labeled sacks. Her mother would have approved. Upstairs, she'd beaten the rugs, swept the hall. In her own room, she'd washed the single quilt until the colors brightened again beneath the fading dye. The second bedroom, Kiz remained untouched. She had no interest in crossing that unspoken boundary. She learned Kai's schedule not from his words, but from the pattern of the door opening and closing, the direction of hoofprints outside. He rose before dawn, worked the horses until dusk, and often didn't speak more than 10 words in a day. But those words, when offered, were solid, grounded. She respected that. After weeks of being talked at, stared at, judged, the quiet here felt like an offering, not a sentence. On the 7th morning, Anya opened the front door and found a neat bundle wrapped in muslin on the porch. Inside, 6 ears of blue corn, a piece of beeswax, and a folded scrap of paper with a name written in careful script. Nalikai's grandmother. That afternoon, she arrived without warning. No knock. No footsteps. Just the door opening and the sharp scent of cedar smoke drifting in behind her. Nali Beth was smaller than Anya remembered, but somehow larger in presence. Her gray braid hung past her waist, thick as rope. She wore a layered skirt, a velvet blouse, and a silver squash blossom necklace that looked like it belonged in a museum. The older woman nodded once at Anya, then moved to the hearth and placed 3 small stones in the fire. No words. Just ritual. Anya stood still, unsure what was expected. Nali hummed under her breath as she set out bundles of herbs, laid a feather on the table, and stirred something unseen in the air. Only when the stones began to crackle did she turn and speak slowly, softly, her English thick with rhythm. House had sickness in it. Not the body kind. The empty kind. Anya blinked. And now? Nali's eyes narrowed, then softened. Now it breathes again. Before Anya could respond, Nali slipped back out the door, vanishing into the falling dusk as silently as she'd come. That night, Kai didn't mention the visit, but he left his boots by the door for the first time. Later that week, Nia climbed the ladder to dust the top shelves in the pantry and discovered a small wooden box tucked into the far corner. Inside were dried rose petals, 2 pieces of sea glass, and a faded ribbon red and frayed at the edge. Not Kai's. Probably not his grandmother's either. Someone else's memory. She closed the box and put it back where she found it. The rhythm of life at the ranch deepened. Anya swept, baked boiled beans, split kindling, mended a torn saddlebag without being asked. She did it all without fanfare, grateful for something to do with her hands. Something that added up at the end of a day. She began watching Kai from the kitchen window. He worked with the horses like someone who had nowhere else to put his tenderness. His movements were slow, consistent, never sharp. When a young mare panicked against the rope, he waited, murmured, let her spin herself quiet before reaching out again. One afternoon, she watched him for nearly an hour. Not because she was fascinated, but because she recognized it. He trained animals the way someone gentle learns to live with pain, with patience, space, and the refusal to force. That evening, she left his dinner uncovered on the table instead of wrapping it in cloth. For the first time, they ate at the same time, though still in silence. On the 9th morning, the wind carried with it the sound of hooves. A rider approached a man with a broad hat, thick coat, and a sly, easy grin. He dismounted without knocking and walked straight to the door, as if he'd done it 100 times before. "Tomas Blackbird," he said with a theatrical bow. "Your favorite half-breed troublemaker?" Kai didn't rise from the table. "You early? Snow light. I thought I'd run supplies out while the roads still hold." He turned to Anya, smiling with the kind of warmth that meant to disarm, but also test. "So you're the woman who's got our cowboy setting 2 plates now?" Anya raised an eyebrow. "And you're the one who can't knock?" Tomas barked a laugh. "She's got teeth. I like her." Kai stood. "You bringing flour or just noise?" Tomas handed over a burlap sack and winked at Anya. "Flour, salt, and news. Town S, talking." "They always do," Kai said flatly. Tomas nodded. "Only now, it's about you. And her." Anya stiffened. He shrugged. "Nothing worse than usual. But they wonder what a woman like you's doing on a ridge like this." Kai's gaze flicked toward her, unreadable. Anya said nothing. She was used to whispers. But here it hit different. Tomas stayed for coffee, traded gossip, and left with a bag of smoked venison. As his horse disappeared beyond the hills, Kai looked out after him and muttered, "Next time he knocks." That night, Anya lay awake, thinking about what Tomas said, about people talking, about silence. In the dark, she could hear Kai upstairs, the faint creak of floorboards. A slow, steady rhythm, not pacing, just movement. Maybe he couldn't sleep either, or maybe he never had. She rose before dawn and walked barefoot across the cold floor, just to feel the chill, to remind herself she was real. Still here, she opened the kitchen window a crack. Cold air rushed in, crisp, brutal. She breathed it in and whispered more to herself than to the land outside. He left no footprints in the snow that morning, but something had shifted between us. The letter came tucked inside a packet of flour and dried beans. Tomas Blackbird dropped it on the table with a wink and a shrug. Didn't T open it? Tempting, though. Smelled like perfume and vengeance. Anya stared at the envelope. The paper was thicker than what most used for mail. Clean edges. Careful penmanship. Miss Anya Sloan, it read. No return address. No markings. No hint of who had sent it. She didn't open it right away. Not while Tomas leaned against the stove, sipping coffee like he owned the place. Not while Kai stood at the counter, rolling tobacco into his usual tight, silent smokes. But the envelope burned hot in her pocket as she scrubbed potatoes, hung blankets, and cleared ashes from the stove. The kind of weight you can't put down just by setting it aside. When dusk settled across the ridge and Tomas finally rode off with his usual dramatic farewell, she stood alone in the kitchen, hands flour-dusted, heart ticking hard behind her ribs. Kai paused in the doorway. "You gonna read it?" She blinked, caught off guard. "You've touched it a dozen times," he added. "Might as well open it." Anya exhaled, shaky. "Stay?" It came out smaller than she meant, almost a whisper. He didn't nod. Didn't he smile? Just pulled out the chair across from hers and sat, arms folded loosely, boots planted wide. She broke the seal. The letter inside was a single page, no greeting beyond her name. Miss Sloane, you don't know me, but I knew Silas Hardin. I'm writing because you deserve the truth, even if it comes too late to help. My name is Rebecca Ford. 2 years ago, Silas courted my sister in Colorado Springs. Promised her land. Marriage. A fresh start. She sold our mother's jewelry to follow him to Arizona. Found him married. Same story you probably lived. She didn't make it through the winter. I'm not writing to wound you. I just found your name in a bundle of Silas's letters, kept like trophies. You're not the first. I doubt you're the last. You were deceived, but you were never foolish. He's the kind of man who hunts hope. Rebecca, the word swam. Not because she didn't understand them, but because understanding cracked something open deep inside her chest. She had spent weeks, no months, believing she was the one who'd been stupid, reckless, desperate. She had carried that shame like a second skin, thick and suffocating. Now it peeled back in one awful, gasping breath. She didn't cry right away. She sat very still. The silence between her and Kai felt different now, not like distance, but like a container. A room built from stillness that let something break without falling apart. When she finally looked up, her voice came rough. I thought it was just me. Kai didn't answer right away. He reached for the letter, scanned it with slow, careful eyes, then set it back down like it might bite. She wasn't the first either, he said quietly. Just the one who didn't make it. Ania pressed her palms to the worn wood of the table. Her fingers left prints in the flower dust. I keep trying to make it make sense, she said. Trying to find the thing I did wrong, the sign I missed. Kai's jaw tightened. There's nothing wrong with trusting someone who says they love you. She laughed, short, bitter. Except when they're lying. That's on them, he said. Not you. Ania stared at the fire. The flames curled slow and steady, eating through the log inch by inch. He collects women like stories, she murmured. Tells just enough truth to make the lies believable. Kai didn't speak. But when he reached across the table and placed his hand over hers, she didn't pull away. His palm was rough, warm, solid. Not comforting, not saving. Just there, and it was enough. They sat like that for a long time, the only sound the whisper of wind against the eaves. Finally, Ania exhaled. I think I believed if I was prettier, smarter, more cautious, maybe he would have chosen me. Maybe I could have been enough. Kai's voice came low. Steady. He didn't leave because you weren't enough. He left because he isn't. Those words hit harder than anything in Rebecca's letter. Not sharp, not cruel, just true. And that truth opened another space inside her. Not empty. Not broken. Cleared. A space she could fill with something else. Later that night, she stood at the edge of the fire and fed the letter into the flames. The paper curled inward, blackened, and turned to ash. She didn't look away. She didn't cry. The next morning, Nalee Beth arrived again, no knock, no announcement. She walked in, sniffed the air, and said only, something gone. Ania blinked. What do you mean? The old woman tapped her chest. Sickness here, in the spirit. It left. I smell clean. She left 3 stones by the hearth. 1 white, 1 red, 1 obsidian. Hold them when you forget who you are. That night, Ania cooked stew thick with bone broth and wild onions. She didn't ask Kai to eat with her. But he sat at the table anyway, fork in hand before she could say a word. They ate in silence. But it was no longer the silence of strangers. Later, she lay in bed, sleep thick and slow in her limbs. But her mind wandered back to the fire. The ash. The feel of Kai's hand. She didn't trust easily. Maybe never would again. But something had changed. Not everything could be burned away. Some scars stayed, but she didn't have to carry Silas Hardin's shame any longer. It was hers. Not anymore. And she'd finally stopped apologizing for surviving. Tomorrow, She would burn the letter, but tonight, she let the truth burn through her instead. The storm arrived the way all the worst ones did, without sound at first. Just a pressure in the air, a stillness to complete to trust. By dusk, the sky had gone an unnatural gray, heavy and low. By nightfall, the wind screamed against the walls like something trying to get in. Kai had nailed boards over the barn windows, checked the latch on the chicken coop 3 times, and brought in every tool that could be lost in a drift. Ania had stacked wood by the stove until her arms ached, boiled water in every pot, and filled cloth sacks with dried beans, flour, and salt. They didn't speak much, but their movements were practiced quick, efficient, the kind of urgency you only learn by surviving too many nights like this. Snow piled fast. The world outside vanished. Inside, the house tightened around them. Every creak of the wood felt louder, more intimate. Every silence stretched longer. On the second day, the wind was still howling, and the chimney moaned like a voice in mourning. The windows iced over until the light turned blue. They were trapped, but the kind of trap that had no fear to it, just waiting, just enduring. That morning, Anya woke to Kai, already at the stove, nursing the fire back to life. "You didn't sleep," she said. He didn't answer, just handed her a tin cup of coffee and nodded toward the window. She sat across from him at the table, fingers wrapped around the cup, steam soft against her face. "This house always this quiet?" she asked. Kai looked up, the corner of his mouth tugging faintly. It used to feel quieter. She wanted to ask what had changed, but she thought she already knew. That evening, while the wind roared and the snow pushed in around the eaves, Anya brought in one of Kai's shirts to mend. It had a tear along the shoulder seam, frayed from years of wear. She sat by the fire, stitching slowly. Across the room, Kai was cleaning his rifle, not with urgency, just habit. The lamp cast golden light between them, flickering shadows across his face. After a while, he spoke. "I had a wife once," he said, not looking up. "And a son?" And Yaz's hands froze mid-stitch. Kai kept working, voice even. 7 years ago, Colorado Springs. I was working a ranch outside the city, saving for land. Sarah was strong, smarter than me. And Matthew, he was just a boy. Bright, loud, always asking why. The needle slipped in her hand. She let it rest in her lap. Scarlet fever came through that winter. Took Matthew first, then Sarah, and the baby she was carrying. He set the rifle aside and leaned back in his chair, eyes fixed on the fire now. I buried them in ground too, frozen to dig deep. Sold everything after. Couldn't he stay? Couldn't breathe in that house? Anya swallowed, her chest tight. "I'm sorry." Kai shook his head. "I'm not telling you for sympathy. Just so you know." She watched him carefully. "Know what?" His gaze met hers, clear, direct, steady. "That I've seen what it looks like when you've got nothing left. And that the only reason I stopped that morning and picked up your penny was because I knew that edge. I've stood on it." Silence sat heavy between them. Not uncomfortable, but full. Charged. Anya reached down, pulled the stitched shirt into her lap again, ran her fingers over the torn seam. "Do you regret stopping?" she asked quietly. Kai leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "No," he said. "I regret how long it took me to stop punishing myself for surviving." Her throat tightened. "I think I've been doing the same," she admitted. "Carrying shame that never belonged to me. Wearing it like a coat I forgot how to take off." "You didn't ask to be lied to. And you didn't ask to be left behind," she said. His expression shifted just enough to show he heard it. They sat there, not speaking, just breathing the same warm air while the storm screamed at the windows. Finally, Anya stood and walked to the fire. She opened her hand and dropped a folded piece of paper into the flames. Kai recognized it instantly. "The letter?" he asked. She nodded. "It said what I needed to know," she said. "Now it doesn't need to exist." He rose slowly, crossed the space between them, and stood beside her as the paper curled black and turned to ash. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It felt like healing, like the beginning of something they didn't have to name yet. That night, when she went to bed, she didn't close the door all the way, and she saw, through the gap, that he didn't either. The fire crackled low, but what passed between them needed no flame to burn. The storm passed in the night, leaving behind a silence so deep it almost hummed. Snow blanketed the world outside the cabin, thick and unbroken. For the first time in days, sunlight slanted through the window, touching everything in golden light. Anya stood at the stove, stirring oats in a dented pot, her body moving by habit. But her thoughts were elsewhere, still wrapped in the warmth of the night before. In the quiet connection that had formed beside the fire, in the way Kai hadn't closed his door. She hadn't teased her. Something was shifting between them. Not fast. Not dramatic. But steady, like a thaw under frozen ground. She didn't know what it was yet, but it didn't scare her the way it might have before. By midday, Kai had saddled one of the horses to check the property line. When he returned, Toma's blackbird came with him. The wind had kicked up again by then, but the sky stayed clear. Anya watched the two men dismount, Kai serious, Tomas grinning like always. She met them at the door, brushing her hands on her apron. Tomas held up a folded note. Brought news. Kai took it without ceremony and passed it to her. It was from Mrs. Carmichael, the boarding house owner in Bitter Wind Crossing. Her cousin's family in Gallup needed a governess. Room and board included. $15 a month. A place in town. A reputation saved. She thought of you, Tomas said, eyes watching her too closely. Said she figured you'd want to start fresh somewhere proper. Anya folded the paper carefully. It felt heavier than it looked. Thank her for me, she said. Tomas tipped his hat. No rush deciding. But it's a fine offer. He didn't stay long. He never did when the wind blew hard. After he rode off, the house fell quiet again. Kai leaned against the doorframe. 15's better than 10. She didn't respond. Just tucked the letter into the folds of her skirt and went back to the stove. But the weight of it followed her all day. It followed her as she chopped carrots for stew, as she boiled water for laundry. As she sat by the window watching Kai work the horses with steady patience. $15? She could save faster. Leave sooner. Start again where no one knew about Silas or the woman foolish enough to follow him across the country. But that woman wasn't the same person who stood here now, fingers smelling of sage and soap, heart not quite so hollow. That evening, Nolly Beth arrived with no words, just a basket of dried herbs and a quiet presence. She sat by the hearth, eyes half closed, and said softly, "Even stones must choose where they stay." Anya didn't ask what she meant. She already knew. Later, after dinner, she and Kai sat across from each other. He sipped his coffee slowly. She held the letter in her lap. "I thought about it," she said. "All day?" Kai didn't answer. Just waited. "I could save faster," she went on. "Have more freedom. Be somewhere no one looks at me like a mistake that showed up late." Still, he said nothing. She lifted her eyes to his. "But I don't want to go." His jaw clenched, just barely. "You sure?" "I am. And I need you to believe that. This isn't gratitude. It isn't fear." She leaned forward. "I'm choosing this. You. This place. Because it feels like something I haven't had in a long time. Something solid." Kai set his cup down. "You don't owe me anything. I know. That's why I'm staying." The fire cracked softly between them. Then he said, slow and careful, "I need you to understand something too." She waited. "If you stay, it's not as a guest, not as someone passing through." She felt her breath catch. He looked at her fully then, all the shadows gone from his face. "It's as a partner. Someone I want to build something with. If you want that too?" Tears pricked her eyes, sudden and hot. "I do," she whispered. "But I'm scared." "So am I." She stood, walked around the table, and reached for his hand. "I'm tired of running," she said. "Tired of being nothing but a shadow of who I was. I want roots. Even if they break ground slow." He took her hand, held it gently. "Then we plant them together. And in that quiet room, with firelight flickering across the walls, the woman who had arrived with nothing but shame and 73 cents finally began to feel whole again. She didn't choose to stay because she had nowhere to go. She stayed because she finally did. Spring came slow to the ridge. The snow didn't melt all at once. It receded inch by inch, reluctant, like it had grown too attached to the land to leave. But the earth beneath remembered warmth. Little by little, brown gave way to green, and the wind, while still sharp, lost its bite. Anya stood at the kitchen window, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, watching the world thaw. In the corral, Kai moved with the young stallion again, the wild one from winter. All fire and fear when she'd first arrived. Now the horse followed him with something close to trust. Its movements were still strong, still stubborn, but measured now. Listening. So was she. She'd planted seeds last week, small things in old tin cans lined up along the sill. Basil, wild mint, a tomato vine she didn't expect to survive. But the act of planting felt like a promise, like proof that she believed there would be a tomorrow worth tending. Behind her, the cabin was clean, warm. The floorboards no longer whispered loneliness. The rocking chair didn't sit in shadow. A red woven blanket draped over its arm, folded carefully. Beside it, a stack of books Kai had finally admitted he read when the evenings grew long. They hadn't made a grand announcement. No preacher. No town ceremony. Just a simple day, 3 weeks back, when the traveling minister came through and Kai asked her quietly if she'd take his name. She had looked at his face, weathered and steady, thought of all the words he hadn't said, but had shown her every day. She had answered with one word, yes. They signed the paper, with Nolly Beth humming behind them and Toma's blackbird miraculously sober standing witness, hat pressed against his chest like it was Sunday morning. No celebration, just coffee after, and the way Kai's hand found hers beneath the table, sure and unshaking. She still signed her name carefully, like trying it on. Mrs. Onia Yazzie. It felt new. Not because she needed the title to mean something, but because, this time, it was hers. A name chosen, not given. A life walked into, not stumbled upon. Outside, Kai let the stallion go. The horse didn't bolt. It stood for a moment, then turned and trotted toward the open field, hooves kicking up wet earth. The door creaked behind her. She didn't T-turn. She knew the way he walked now, the weight of his footsteps, the cadence of his breath. He wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he murmured, voice thick with sleep. "How far we've come," she said softly. "How different this April is from last Christmas." He didn't speak right away, just pulled her a little closer until her back rested fully against his chest. "You saved more than yourself when you got on that wagon," he said at last, voice low. "You saved me too." Anya turned in his arms, tilted her head back to look at him. His eyes, gray as stone, soft as spring rain, now met hers without hesitation. "We saved each other," she said. He smiled, one of those rare ones that lit his whole face. "I can live with that." The sun crept higher, casting golden light across the pine table, the hearth. The wooden floor she had scrubbed a dozen times. Wildflowers, real ones this time, not dried, sat in a jar by the window. Purple, yellow, soft white. Picked by Kai on his morning ride. He hadn't said a word when he placed them there. He never did. But she always noticed. They stood like that a while longer, holding each other, saying nothing. The kind of nothing that held more meaning than most people's everything. Finally, he pulled back, kissed her temple, and said, "Come on. We've got work to do." She smiled, took his hand, and stepped with him out into the light. Later that evening, as the sun sank behind the ridge, she sat on the front porch, wrapped in a shawl, a journal open in her lap. She hadn't written since Kansas. But today the words came. Simple, unpolished, true. Hope isn't something that happens to you. It's something you choose. Again and again, even when it feels foolish. even when it hurts. Even when you've been burned before, you choose it anyway. You reach out. You stay. You plant things that may not bloom. You love someone who's still learning how to be loved. And sometimes, by some quiet miracle, they love you back. She closed the journal, her fingers resting lightly on the cover. The light was fading, but the house behind her was warm. Safe. Chosen. And this time, when the light poured through the kitchen window, she didn't flinch. She stepped into it.